Well, hello, good morning everyone. We've already started off with some really good chat in the chat section. Welcome to another Voice Essentials Live YouTube Hangout. It is so good to be with you this morning, and I've been sort of a bit nervous about today's topic, and because I really want to create some discussion around what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the concept of the 10,000 hours rule, and it's such a confronting number, I think, for many of us. Certainly when we apply it to the development of our singing. And so I've got a few questions that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to pose them to you, and I'm hoping that we can get some really good discussion happening in the chat section, which we'll go across to in a moment. We've already started having some good stuff. It must be a really good time it's 2 a.m. in Germany. I went to say it must be a really good time in Germany because we've got a few people already joining us from Germany, but if it's 2 a.m., why are you people still up? I applaud and admire your commitment, but I do agree with not your usual guy. It must be that in Germany there's a few insomniacs. So anyway, regardless, welcome to another live hangout, and I'm really looking forward to spending the next 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes with you, and having a really good chat about those things that help us along our road to developing our voice. But before we do, we always play this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Dan. I'm a contemporary singing voice specialist, and as I say quite often, it is my job to help you realise the full potential of your singing voice. And sometimes that requires us to talk about the voice as opposed to just singing, and talking about our developmental processes, not only practically, physically, but also mentally. And just recently you might have seen a video that's been doing the rounds, certainly on Facebook here in Australia, that we've been seeing it do the rounds. Oh, for that matter, for those of you who don't know where I am in the great land down under called Australia, and my studio is here in Brisbane, which is around about 1,000 k's north of Sydney on the eastern seaboard of Australia, and it's a beautiful. We have had the most gorgeous weather here in the last week, and so what I'd love you to do, as some people have already done in the chat section, make sure you let us know where you're from, what time is it, what's the weather like. Many of you in the northern hemisphere are starting to experience the bite of winter, so let us know how you're coping with that. But as I said, there's been this video making the rounds of Ed Sheeran. It's actually a 2014 video, but for some reason it's getting a little bit more of a new push. And I've actually placed it in so that you can watch it in your own time in a playlist in the description section below this video, which I'd encourage you to have a watch of once we've done our live stream together. Anyway, it's Ed Sheeran talking about the fact that, he gets really frustrated by the fact that people walk up and just constantly say, oh, you're so lucky to be so, naturally gifted in the area of your music and your singing. And he gets not only frustrated, but he also has a bit of a chuckle to himself because he knows where he's come from, and that's often difficult for us, the admiring public, to be able to see of these artists. We don't get to see the arduous hours spent, do we, by these artists in closed rooms, just toiling away at their craft. And he actually plays on that video. Again, I really encourage you to have a watch of it. He plays through his iPhone, actually, or his mobile device. He plays the track of a track of him when he was a kid, and the singing wasn't crash hot. It really showed that he had some work to do, and that's refreshing for me. Sometimes I feel like I'm a vigilante in really battling the machine that constantly puts out perfected everything. We can't buy a magazine these days, and we can't buy a CD that hasn't been doctored to the point where what we're looking at, what we're listening to, is simply no longer, not even a faint resemblance of what it originally was. And so I guess it's refreshing for me to observe these, an artist like Ed Sheeran, who has had a lot of success, actually put his hand up and go, no, this is not natural talent. This is hard work. It's something that I've had to put my shoulder to the wheel and really work at. And so it really brought up this idea of what we often hear referred to as the 10,000 hour rule. And the 10,000 hour rule basically goes along the lines of, for you to become an expert in anything, and this is beyond competency. So this is not simply becoming average, this is becoming an expert. You must do the 10,000 hours. And I think there's been some studies to suggest that the number of hours is not quite right. Regardless, I think the essence of the idea of the 10,000 hour rule is rather good. It reminds us that you must travel a journey. This is not a game of snakes and ladders, and I think in modern society we want to approach, let's keep it to the development of singing, we want to approach the development of voice like a game of snakes and ladders. I think many of us are familiar with the game of snakes and ladders. It's a child's game where you take a piece and you roll the dice, and there's 100 squares, and it's laid out in a matrix, and if you roll your dice and you land on a ladder, then you can get taken from the second square up to the 13th square, and it gives you a boost. Equally, if you land on a snake, you can go all the way from box 99 all the way back down to box 3. And obviously to win the game, you've got to get from 0 to 100. And, I think a lot of us, not necessarily those of us here at Voice Essentials, I'd like to think, but there is this drive in current society that wants to tell us, just roll the dice and maybe you'll hit the ladder and it'll just take you straight from 0 to hero. We see this so often in the process of TV talent shows where, we have these young people who think that all they've got to do is just be discovered, and they'll go from 0 to hero. And I was saying to a student yesterday, we were talking about this very subject, and I've made this comment before, and I want to be careful and sensitive in the way I say this, because, well, I think you'll understand the sensitivity of the illustration. But, quite often when babies are born prematurely, they later in life will encounter learning difficulties and other challenges. Not always, but often. And there's growing research around that. I often see this in prematurely delivered artists that have not gone the full journey of that embryonic and birthing process. And suddenly they're thrust into the limelight before they're really ready. They haven't learnt what it is to exist in the big bad world of the artistic space, and that may up front, we often don't get to see the complications that process creates in the moment of a TV talent show, for example. That often it gets exposed later when all the fanfare has gone away and we're simply left with just the artist having to, workshop in a world where the TV talent show has moved on, the exposure that's attached to that is no longer there, and we're just left with the artist. And that's where we often will see the learning difficulties start to be exposed. And as I said, I want to be sensitive with that, the use of that illustration. But nonetheless, I think it does help for us to remind ourselves that the process of developing as an artist is a journey. And I've said this many times. For those of you who are regulars to my channel, I've said this many times. The journey has way too much to teach you. Don't circumnavigate the journey. Do your 10,000 hours. And so what I want to do now is I want to turn the discussion over to you, those of you who have been able to join for the live chat today. And I want to ask you this question, and I'm going to go across to the live chat. I want to see what you're thinking. And I want to ask, first I'm going to ask a few questions. The first question I want to ask is, why do you think it is that many of us have a propensity, many of us have a leaning towards trying to avoid the 10,000 hours? Why is that? What is it in us that causes us to want to avoid? Is it laziness? Is it something far less sinister? Is it the cost of time, the cost of money? Or is it simply that, we do all have a variety of priorities in our life, and modern life being as busy as it is, we all have to prioritize. I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Let's go across to some discussion here. And so while you're thinking about that and writing down your answers, if we go down here, I'm just going to jump back up here and say hello to a few of you. It's good to see so many. Norway. Wow, Keika, it's good to have you along from Norway. It's good to have you join us. There's a lot of happy smiles. The emoticons are becoming a thing, aren't they? It's good to see. I guess that would suggest that many of you are on mobile devices, which is great. Oxford, 1 a.m. The weather is good, it's warm, and the sky is clear. That's good to hear, Bartek. Bartek's a regular for those of you who have never met Bartek before. Mexico City, and it's raining. Not good to hear, Wolfgang. It's I hope you're dry wherever you are. Florida, it's cooling down into evening. Matthew, nice to have you. My cousin from across the ditch in New Zealand. New Zealand is superior in many ways, Matthew. In many ways, that's that's very parochial of you, Matthew. Okay, so let's get down to here, where Bartek at the bottom has responded to the question by writing, I hope many of you can see it, we are an instant generation. We're used to getting everything immediately. Our skill of building up certain things over long time decreased. Also, singing is specific. It is thought to either be inborn or not. That's an interesting point, Bartek. I think we do have a society in modern Western culture that suggests that you either can do it or you can't. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the video that you'll have the opportunity to watch after today's stream. That Ed Sheeran, I don't think was born the natural singer that we all perceive him to be currently. He really had to work darn hard to achieve. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who works darn hard has the same opportunities afforded to them as Ed Sheeran. But I guess where you arrive is not the point, is it? It's actually always approaching your singing as, here's another little saying that I have in my studio, it's all about process over product. Don't be so concerned about where you're going to arrive that you miss the enjoyment of the journey along the way, and the lessons that the journey has to teach you. What else have we got here? I think sometimes, this is from Wolfgang, I think it sometimes has to be with wanting to be great but not taking it seriously. Yeah, I think I think we're just often, aren't we, Wolfgang? We're not often willing to pay the price. And it reminds me of a little story. I don't know how true this story is, but certainly it's a story I've heard many times. And that is, there was once a great maestro, a great pianist, who put on this big concert. And a mother had taken her 7-year-old daughter along to watch this pianist. And this daughter was in, this 7-year-old child was in awe of what this this piano teacher had done. And she had the opportunity to talk to the composer at the end of the event. The pianist. And with big saucer eyes, she looked up at the pianist and she said, "Oh, I would give my life to be able to play like you." And the pianist simply looked at her with a smile and said, "I have." And that is, I guess, really a sobering thought. He had given his life to play like he was playing and had played. And that's the thing, is it's the counting of the cost. And it's the counting of the cost before you can know what that cost often is going to purchase outside of the development of the craft. In the area of singing, it's counting the cost, being ready to pay the price before you know that you'll actually achieve the very thing that you've set out to achieve, whether that be, winning a Grammy or simply being able to stand in front of an audience and sing. And so some really good thoughts there, Wolfgang. We've got some questions starting to arrive, and yeah, leave your questions here in the chat section, because after we've had this small discussion, I do want to just answer a couple of your questions. We always do a live Q&A at the end of our live streams together, so make sure you do that. And look, if I'm seeing some new names, which is great. It is. If this is your first time you've ever joined our live stream, look, we have a channel here called Voice Essentials and an ever-growing community. Oh, I forgot to say, we clicked over the 15,000 subscriber mark this morning, which was very exciting. And we are an ever-growing community of singers from across the globe, an encouraging group. Which I think stands in stark contrast to a number of other groups that are out there. We are an encouraging group, a positive group of singers, and this is a group where everybody sings. And I think if you've been listening to the discussion for the last 5 or 10 minutes, you'll hopefully hear that basis of ethos coming through. That this is not an either or. This is not some people sing and some people don't. This is everyone has the right, the human birthright to sing, and we're all on a journey of developing our voices to realize the full potential of our own voice. And our potential may not be the potential of someone else, but that's kind of not the point. And that's in part what we're talking about here today. So leave your questions, it's good. Thank you for sharing, Dr. Dan. Steve, that's a pleasure, mate. It's good to have along. Let's ask another question, and while you're thinking about the question, I'll answer some direct questions here. I've got another question here. What do you think the pursuit of expertise is driven by? So that's quite a sort of an open question. What do you think? Is it our desire to be famous? Is it a desire to be rich? Is it something else? What is it? A search for significance? I think these are really valuable questions to ask of ourselves, because it's only as we unlock the answers to that question, what is driving my need to develop? Is it for the sheer joy of singing? Or is it something grander than that, superficially? And so I want to pose that question to you. If you feel free to answer, what is it internally that drives your desire to sing? What is it about it that, and I often ask brand new students when they step into the studio, either here online or in the studio, what is it that drives you to sing? Is it self-motivated? Do you come from a family culture that encouraged it? And so over to you. What is driving you to sing? And what is driving you to take up the mantle of the 10,000 hours and apply yourself to that? And while you're thinking about that, let's see if we can go over and answer some questions. R2 Official, I have a problem with my problem finding my voice. I feel like I'm not unlocking something yet, but I still have much work on. Well, that's because it is the journey, Artificial, and can I encourage you to jump over to the channel and just in the last week, so the most recent video that you will be able to have a look at on the channel actually talks to the idea of developing the body of your voice, and I think you'll find that helpful. And there are a couple of other videos there also, mate, where you can have a look at finding your own voice, and you can certainly go and have a look for those as well. But I always say, and this, I know this is going to sound like it's trivializing your question. It isn't. Certainly not designed to. Your voice is not yet to be discovered. It's there. You know it. You hear it. What you have to learn to do is simply get to know it better and become comfortable with the anatomy that God has given you and that you have naturally got access to. I had to, over the years, get used to my nickname in high school was Squeak, and I had to become comfortable with the fact that I have a naturally high voice, that on the phone I am often misheard as being a woman. And despite having a ponytail, my wife can assure you I'm not a woman. But yet on the phone, I am often, they'll often say, "Oh, Mrs. Robinson, nice to hear from you," or what have you. And it took me a little while to sort of work through my identity of that. Now I am very comfortable with the fact that, yes, I have a naturally high voice, and yes, at times I am going to be misheard as being female. Jumping back over to here, do you think? Let's see here. I'm going to go back up to here. Congrats, Doc. Oh, thanks, Bartek. Yeah, on the 15,000 subs. It's great, isn't it? But it's great because we're a growing community. I've been really enjoying this process since I had 1,000 subs. The subs is not the big deal. The subs is that we're gathering a group of like-minded people who feel that they can join together, and I think that's fantastic. Good evening from Austin, Texas. G'day, Brian. I think we generally focus on the end result and not what it takes to get in singing or any other serious endeavor. And Brian, I think you're right. I think we put the cart before the horse, and in doing so we get it all muddled up, and we do focus on the product and we forget about the process. And when we do that, I think we run aground. Dan, the weekend was bad here. Is the link was bad here? Is the link? Oh, okay. So Kaka, I dare say you're suggesting that there is a video there that talks about where the weekend had not yet fully come of age, which is great to have shared that. That's great. Joy of singing. The joy of this, no, not your usual guy, is just saying the joy of singing and a bit of perfectionism to achieve what I hear myself like in my head, my inner self coming out through practice, maybe. Yeah, I think I'm just trying to unpack what you're trying to say here, not your usual guy. This question here, for those of you who are trying to have a look, it is about the joy of singing first. Can I tell you, as a person who's had a professional singing career dating back into the early 90s, there are times that I can tell you, where if I hadn't had the joy of singing as my foundation first, that, I would have thrown the towel in many times, because, in professional level singing, sometimes the pressure and the stress can be very high. And if you don't have the joy as your foundation when it comes to your singing, then often the foundation can be quite rocky. So yeah, it is the joy of singing. Squeak, hi Pascal. Yes, Squeak was my nickname in high school, and it was an endearing term, and I never took it to be. It's funny, I never really took it to be overly offensive. In high school, I was known as a singer in high school, and my nickname was Squeak. But nonetheless, I think that it did have that little barb to it that I did have to, become comfortable with. And, high school for many people can be much harsher than what my high school experience was. So I've got nothing to complain about. I do want to just answer, we do need to wrap up. I've really enjoyed our discussion today, which has been fantastic. I do want to start wrapping up, and I do want to answer a couple of just generic questions. I've just noticed this question, this comment here by Nightmare Foxy. I sing because I love music. Listening to music changes me in a way nothing else does, and I want to be able to make that change and mold who I am through song. We should just end on that. We're not going to, but we should. That's what music is. Art has this wonderful and tremendous power, doesn't it, to change and transform not only the audience that is having that message delivered to them, but also the deliverer. We, the person, the person that imbibes that message, the person that is delivering that message, we are often transformed through that art as well. And what a lovely way to say it. And Tony down here has said that your story about a pianist reminded me of the great tale. The young man stops the musician street in New York and asks, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" The older man answers, "Practice, man, practice." Yes. Exactly, Tony. Love it. And that is very true. Many of us see Carnegie Hall as the ultimate. Now, I just want to answer a question I saw back up here, if you'll bear with me for just a moment. Bartek asked, could you present us a perfectly taken breath and sing a long note and explain which muscles are involved and which not, which should be relaxed and which not? That is a good question, Bartek. Let me take it across to here. Oh, for those of you, actually, just give me a second here. Because I'm going to need to do this. So here I am. Can you all see? You can see me. I don't think I've ever introduced you all to Tabitha. Say hello, Tab. So Tabitha is our family cat, and she is nearly 15. She's an old girl, but I'm a cat person, everyone. My wife, not so much. She's a dog person, and my eldest daughter, she's definitely a cat person. But my other two kids are dog people. You might want to leave in the chat section. What are you, a cat person or a dog person? And so Tabitha is often here in the studio, listening to students singing, aren't you? Your technique vocally must be excellent by now, Tabitha, with the amount of instruction that you've heard. Let me just put Tabitha out for a moment. I'm not chucking her out because I just know her well enough that once I pick her up, she's going to want to go out. Okay, so breathing. Bartek, I would encourage you to jump across to the channel, go searching for videos on breath management, but I will very quickly just show you. Breathing should always have this sense of release of the abdominal wall for the intake of air. So as your diaphragm descends, you get a good sense of release. Your abdominal wall is releasing. We want to get our sense of structure, our sense of support from the obliques. Our abdominal wall on exhalation should always have a sense of firm jelly. And you'll hear these instructions on my exercise CD if you've got a copy of it. Track 13 and 14 are both good breath management activities. And then what we're looking for is our sense of structure. The obliques remain engaged on the exhalation. So when we think about the inhalation process, if we're able to get into a really good habit of being able to release the abdominal wall, letting it passively fall away, it means that the obliques, your diaphragm is able to make a complete and quick descent. So when you learn to breathe well, things like sip breath and quick breath are virtually obsolete because every breath becomes instantaneous without then creating subglottal pressure that is going to cause the larynx to want to valve back against that pressure. And so I won't go into it in any more detail right now, but that's essentially what you're looking for. You're always looking for a good sense of release, allowing air to rush in. Then as you're exhaling, you should have a sense of really good engagement through the obliques. And then that manages the recoil, the passive recoil of the diaphragm as you then sing an extending line. So it should be ya. I don't know how long that was, but most phrases, especially in contemporary music, aren't that much longer than that. And if they were, then you would need to build up to it. And I often talk about breath management with my students as being, in some songs, you do need to choreograph your breath. That is, if you don't get a breath at this moment, there is going to be no more other opportunities to get the breath. So you must get the breath here. And just like a dancer needs to choreograph their dance steps, their movements, so too the singer at times must choreograph their breath and know that in that moment, that's where I need to release, get my air so that I can continue the next phrase completely. So hopefully, Bartek, that was helpful to you. Let's bring it back over here, and I want to give one more question away. Tracy Rockhouse, nice to see you, Tracy. Hi, Dan. Yes, totally agree. You really do have to have the love. I love it, and spent time last week preparing for Big Gig, listening to handy hints and getting back to basics in some ways, and it really helped. You know, that's it, isn't it, Tracy? You know, you are never so well developed as a singer that you can forget the basics. You must always have those basics just permeating through your thinking. And you should never be so big, you know, and have such a high opinion of yourself that you think you have moved beyond the basics. The moment you move beyond the basics is the moment you cut out, you know, you pull the trunk out from underneath you, and you never want to do that. So fabulous point there, Tracy. Dr. Dan, how do we employ accent breathing? You've mentioned it shortly, but I'm still puzzled what it is. Accent breath is something that I subscribe to, but in many ways I kind of combine the ideals of appoggio with accent. Now, appoggio in the sense that I really love this where we center our sense of work, which is through the obliques, which is very accent. That being said, I still use some appoggio work, which, you know, I take from Richard Miller's Structure of Singing, and so you'll know the couple of exercises that are on my exercise CD are appoggio, but I do, over the top of the appoggio activity, I place accent breath method ideals. And accent breath is all about making sure that It's not about, you know, big chest and what have you. Certainly for a contemporary singer, it's all about orientating so that the abdominal wall is no longer where we orientate our thinking to, but our obliques is a big part of it. But I want to stop. I will really say this. I have done a couple of seminars where Ron Morris, a very well-known accent breath method person, has given classes, and I've done activities alongside Ron in those classes, but I'm not a trained accent methodologist, and so I want to stop short of giving you specific activities. It may well be that perhaps in the future we can get someone like Ron on to talk about it more specifically, and they can teach us all a little bit more about those things. Well, there you go, everyone. It has been such a good chat. I hope you've got a lot out of today's live stream. Remember, we do these live streams every week, generally on a Monday or a Tuesday, depending on when I've got availabilities. For those of you who have never been here before, I am a singing voice specialist. I have anywhere between 60, sometimes 50 to 60, sometimes up to 70 students at any given moment over a fortnight, and so I'm fitting these sessions in amongst, often in a cancellation, and so we do them Mondays, Tuesdays. Then on Thursdays, I release a pre-recorded video where we really unpack a specific technical issue in detail, and so make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, because that's the only way that you will be notified about these live streams, so that you'll know when I'm going live, because sometimes it can be, you know, in the morning Australian Eastern Standard Time, and sometimes it's in the afternoon. The only way you'll find out is if you hit the bell icon, and that way you'll receive notification from YouTube about that. But until I see you in the next Voice Essentials video, and I really do hope we get to see each other again, my name is Dr. Dan. Sing well.